is DJ BChang, and I'm here to give you a intro to DJing, DJ 101, and I've divided it up into two parts. So the first part is going to be more of a history and culture lesson of DJing. We'll sprinkle in a little bit of DJ philosophies here and there, and then we'll take some time to go over all the equipment just to kind of show you what all the different buttons do and stuff. So before I begin, I'd like to thank Dance Music Initiative as well as Make Music Alliance for making this whole thing possible. And huge shout out to Dilated Recordings for facilitating the stream. Without their help, we wouldn't have been able to make this as cool as it is. So, okay. So I want to start off my lecture with just a question to the audience, right? So what does a DJ do? So, think about that a little bit. A DJ plays music, right? And they don't just play music. They play music for typically at parties or at events. And what are people doing at those events? Well, most of the time they're dancing, right? So a DJ is playing music for people to dance to. But their job is a little bit more in-depth than just going through those motions of just playing music, right? A robot can do that. We can have an iPod just playing music for people to dance to. But a DJ does a few steps beyond that that makes it a little bit more engaging and a little bit more human and interesting. So one of those things is that they're focusing on setting the vibe for the event. And what I mean by that is picture an event, right? So let's say you're at a pool party, and that pool party has people lounging, the sun's out, it's nice and warm. It's a pretty chill vibe. It's not like a huge dance party. It's more like kind of a fun, just like kind of like nice, pleasant, relaxing experience, right? So a DJ at a pool party might play music that has more of a warmer tone to it, or like more of a loungy vibe, right? Something that you can kind of like, sit in your beach chair and kind of just like bob your head to, right? Have some drinks on the side, all that. So that's kind of like playing appropriate music and setting the vibe for that event. Now let's say you're a DJ and you're playing like a huge main stage set, right? At EDC or some other big festival, right? If it's like peak time and you really, the crowd has been waiting all day for your performance, and you get up there and you want to really amp up that crowd and get them to, to jump up and down and raise their hands, you need to play some really energetic music, right? So it's all about picking and selecting the right music that's most appropriate for that moment in time. So that's about setting the vibe. Now, another thing that DJs do are they're kind of the captain of the party ship, right? So they pick the vibe, but then they carry that vibe and they develop it over the time of their whole performance. So they might start off real easy, right? And then kind of amp up the energy gradually over time until it reaches this big peak. And then maybe at the tail end of their set, maybe they bring it down a little bit more, right? That's what a lot of DJs call taking you on a journey, or maybe telling a story. But generally, it's this narrative that passes over the whole set. It's not just one collection of individual songs. It's a whole set of songs that has some kind of progression, and that progression is up to the DJ. Another big part of steering the party ship is observing the crowd and making sure that what you're playing makes sense. You're getting a reaction. People are dancing. People are into it. People are tapping their feet. If you see a lot of disengagement, or people leaving the party or going to the bar to get drinks or whatever, you might need to switch gears, right? What you thought the party was going to be going into it might not be really landing with this particular audience at this time. And that's something you can't control. So as a DJ, do you continue and just plow forward and cross your fingers, or do you add value to the event and adjust like a human should and pick music that might get them going? So that's steering the party ship. So the other role a DJ plays is they're a tastemaker. And what I mean by tastemaker is that they're selecting specific tracks that, one, they think is good, that they think is appropriate for a party, they think it's appropriate for this point in time. But really, they're trying to share music that they think is special or really awesome, and they want to share it with the crowd. DJing is a very a collaborative kind of experience. if you were, let's say, on the radio, record labels are paying you lots of money or whatever to play specific songs, that you're more like you're doing a job, right? Versus if you're playing more the taste maker role, you might be digging real deep and finding unknown acts or lesser marketed artists to play music that you just think is like super cool, right? And that more people should hear. That's a way for a lot of these smaller acts to get discovered. So yeah, taste making has always been an important part of DJing. We've covered a little bit about what DJs do. Now let's talk about some different kinds of DJs. So I'm going to hit three major kinds. One, there's where the name DJ came from, referring to like a radio DJ. So if you take the two letters D and J, what do they stand for? Now it just means this idea of that you have a person performing and mixing music, right? But originally, DJ stands for disc jockey, right? Nowadays, you don't have very many DJs spinning discs anymore. It's all digital, right? People are rolling up with MP3s or computers, whatnot, and that's how they DJ music. But back in the day, you would play records, and that would be the disc part of DJ. And what they would do is they would set the needle down onto the record, and they would let it play the groove, and that would be the needle is like riding the groove, right? And so they came up with this term jockey because a jockey rides a horse. Well, a DJ rides the groove with the needle, right? So they're a disc jockey. Okay. So that's one kind of DJ. Those DJs were really about taste making and like getting the word out there about artists. Whereas you would say you have like a club DJ, which is our second kind of DJ. Club DJs or performance DJs, artist DJs, those DJs are putting together sets, oftentimes of sometimes their own original music or other tracks that they've collected along the way and creating that journey experience I described earlier. These DJs are playing sets that are already kind of like with a vibe in mind. Sometimes they're off the cuff, sometimes they're pre-constructed, but they're trying to tell a story that represents them as an artist. And then you have what's called mobile DJs. Mobile DJs are entertainers. They are service for hire. These DJs will get hired or booked to play, say, a wedding or a corporate event or perform at an outdoor cultural event or whatever. Those events are still extremely important and valuable, right? They're still DJing, but it's just a different mindset, right? Oftentimes, when you book a mobile DJ, you might have some songs already in mind, right? Let's say it's your wedding and you want a specific song for the bride entrance or a specific song for the father-daughter dance or whatever. You would work that out with the DJ ahead of time, and they would make sure that they play those on cue. They maybe will announce the event, which is called an MC, a Master of Ceremonies, and make sure that they're hitting all these cues along the way. So they're doing a lot of work, and they're providing an extremely valuable service for your special day. And so that's just a different kind of DJ, right? And their goal is just to kind of keep the party happy and going and keep that energy up. So let me ask you a philosophical question, one of them being, what makes music danceable? Okay? So I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think about what is the most important thing that makes music danceable. All right? You got some ideas? Okay, when I ever ask the crowd this question, usually the number one answer is a beat. Okay? So a beat is super important to making music danceable, right? And that helps people know where to put their feet. So if the beat is going bum, 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 they know to go right, left, right, right? Okay. So beats are super important for dance music, okay? That's not exactly the answer I'm looking for. Another answer that people say is rhythm. Well, rhythm is very tied into beats. Rhythm is more like a collection of beats, right? So let's say our rhythm is like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So now you don't have a beat on its own, now you have a collection, and that collection of beats goes in a pattern that it repeats. So beats and rhythm, super important to being able to dance to music, but not the most important thing. Okay, so the way I'm going to demonstrate why beats and rhythm alone are not all you need, I'm going to make up a song on the spot. So this song is gonna go something like this. It's gonna go bump bump ba-dum bump 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 bump. Okay, that's my song. It's a terrible song. No one would dance to that, and you can tell no one's gonna dance to that song. Why? Because it's random. It's so all over the place. Like I don't know where to put my feet. Right. So even though it has beats and rhythm, people don't know how to dance to that song. What the number one thing is, it's about predictability, okay? So if you can predict ahead of time how the song is going to flow, then you're going to have a much easier time dancing to it because you know where to put your feet and move your body in time with the music. So here's another question for you guys. So why are dance floors usually dark, right? We've all seen it. We've all, walked into either a bar or a club or performance, and they always lower the lights, or the lights are dark before you get there. And why is that? So take a moment, think about it. When it's dark, you allow more ability to mess with the lights or to do like cool presentations or put up visuals and stuff like that. Okay, well that helps. That helps people get in the mood. It's stimulating, right? When you have a dance floor and a club event. Other people say that when you make it dark, you take away some of the stimulation and it enhances the other senses, right? And so if you can't see as much, then you might be hearing more. And there's some truth to that. I think that more people will be able to focus or feel those emotions a little bit better. But still, that's not the number one reason why dance floors are dark. Dance floors are dark because people are self-conscious, right? Dancing is this kind of weird activity that's kind of foreign to a lot of people, right? It's not something that you can point at someone and say, dance. It's like you got to kind of get in the mood. You got to ease in. Sometimes people, get liquid courage, right? You just got to be in the moment and feel comfortable. And when the lights are low and can't see the person's face very well who's standing next to me or dancing next to me, I feel a little more comfortable because my identity is not like super in their face either, right? So if I move around a little bit and look a little weird, it's okay. You notice like as soon as the lights come on in the club, everyone stops dancing, everyone goes home because that's like the universal signal that the event is over. No one wants like a spotlight on them if they're not a professional, right? So you just gotta, get people in that zone and make them feel comfortable, and just turning down the lights a little lower. I know it's cool to like turn up a bunch of lights and do all these effects, but you notice when there's a lot of effects going on, everyone typically stands in the back of the room, right? Because they don't want to be on stage in a sense. They just want to groove and have a good time. A lot of times at these like dark warehouse parties, you'll have people just like getting down, right? And it's like super dark and, the walls are sweating and like it's got that vibe, it's got that environment, and it's paired up with the music, it's paired up with the people on the floor, it's paired up with the lack of light. So all those things help create a successful dance floor. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about DJs and their role in the dance floor. You might have heard the analogy that never trust a skinny chef, right? So if you're a chef and you're really good at making food, but you're like super skinny, it's kind of like this disconnect, right? Like, don't you like food, right? That's not always the case, but that's just the saying. So I always kind of turn that into the DJ world and I say, hey, don't trust a DJ that doesn't dance, because if you as a DJ should be really good at knowing what makes other people dance, well, you should have a very good idea of what makes you dance, right? So if you know the product that you're selling, then because you've been a consumer on the other end, then you're going to have an easier time, right? So that's just a general thing. Like if you want to be a better DJ, go to events, be on the dance floor, really soak it in, lose yourself, Those are why DJs do what they do, is because they've had so much time being on the other side of the decks. So when they get behind the decks, they have a good understanding and know what to do. Okay, So those are some of the questions for you as the audience. Now I'm going to turn and focus in a little bit about the history and culture of DJing. It all started, the first recording of sound started in 1877. The first person to invent the recording of sound, super famous inventor, remember 1877. Anybody think they know who that is? Okay. All right, give you a hint. This man also invented the light bulb. All right, so now, okay, we have a pretty good idea. All right, so the first person to record sound was Thomas Edison, right? Prolific inventor. The way he did it was he took a primitive machine that he made and he spoke into a cone, right? And when he spoke into the cone, the sound waves got concentrated into a point. And at the end of the point, I'm going to actually switch mics so I can demonstrate this with both hands. So at the end of the point, there was this tiny little hammer that as he spoke into it, it moved the hammer, right? And so it was kind of like this. All right. And on the other end of that hammer, he had this little rotating piece of tinfoil. And when he spoke into it, the little hammer dug grooves into the tinfoil. And that was the first time that sound was ever recorded. Now, think about what it was like living around that time. If you didn't have a way of recording and replaying back sound, that means music, which certainly existed then, didn't have a way to be enjoyed without you being in the presence of like an orchestra or a live band or you playing it yourself. So today, we have music everywhere. We take it for granted. We hear it, in our cars. We have it on our phones in our pocket. We hear it at the grocery store. There's music everywhere, and that's made possible because we can record music. Now, fast forward a bit in time, now until like the 19-teens, 20s, 30s, they started figuring out how to save recordings on physical media, right? And that's when records came into place. So I'm going to hold up this record right here. So this record is a physical representation of a song. And what they've done is they've pressed the sound waves into the record, so when it gets played, you can hear the sound get reproduced. These records were mass-produced and started being distributed around the world. It kind of took shape in the 1950s. So in the 1950s, music became accessible and it became replayable at home on your home stereo system and whatnot. And that's how it took off from there. 50s and 60s is kind of the record eras. Then you get into the 70s. And 70s is when the first DJs came about. Basically in these clubs that were primarily playing disco music, they would take records, right, just standard albums or whatever, and they would play them for the audience. And they figured out that that there were certain parts of the song that really got the crowd moving, that really kept the energy up. And what they did was they took two of the same records, sometimes, and played that section of the song that everyone was dancing to back to back. And what they did was they extended that part and they created a longer dance section, right? And that was originally referred to as the breakdown. Nowadays, breakdown means different things to DJs now, which I'll get into later. So they either did that with the same song on both sides, or they would cue up the next song, and then they would play that one right as the other one ended, okay? So that was their first kind of modern forms of DJing. They weren't necessarily doing a lot of mixing then. They were just doing like sequencing or selecting. They were selecting tracks, still vibe setting, still taste making, and controlling that dance floor, but not doing the kind of stuff that we're going to be teaching later today. One of the pioneers that come up with those methods was DJ Kool Herc, and this came out of the Bronx in New York. A lot of the pioneers of DJing. Another one is Grand Wizard Theodore. He was the person who first formalized the scratch sound, and the scratch sound is, let me see if I can get one going. The scratch sound is when you take the record, you put the needle on, and you get that little scratch sound. And then you had Grandmaster Flash, which took the techniques of both Kool Herc and Grand Wizard Theodore, combine them together, refine them, and really put this whole DJing form of music on the map by being in Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5, as well as releasing new tracks versus just playing other people's music. So that really put DJ culture and DJ music on the map, and it was all rooted in hip hop. So whereas like some of the original selectors were rooted in disco, right? So now you have this like kind of branching out of two different genres of music, but still being DJ culture. Then into the 80s, you have the house scene out of Chicago start up, and then out of Detroit, you have techno take hold, right? And these are formed by all these camps applying these methods and creating new kinds of sounds and new kinds of flavors and vibes. The funny thing about techno is a lot of people hear that term and they think, oh, that's electronic music. Electronic music is techno, right? Well, techno is actually a specific genre within electronic music that has a really specific sound. Into the modern era, like maybe the last 10, 15 years, you've seen DJing take more of a digital presence. So they moved over to CDJs, which are emulating records. However, instead of a record you're putting down a CD into a slot. And then even though people use CDJs professionally today, no one's really using CDs anymore. What they do is they just plug in their little USB stick into their CDJ, and they load all their music from a USB stick. So instead of bringing like maybe 100, 200 tracks, records to a gig, you can bring thousands of songs right in your pocket. And if you think about it, being a DJ back in the day, like every record weighs roughly a pound. So if you're bringing 100 to 200 records, you're bringing 100 to 200 pounds of gear with you just in music to your gig. You're walking upstairs. You're carting it from your house to the venue. It was nuts, right? So those are some of the struggles that all the old school DJs will shake their heads and nod, say, "Yep, I remember those days." Even more recently, now you have DJs that are using controllers, and controllers is just like a way to interact with your music in different digital ways, right? Sometimes you're playing music on your laptop, but you want to interact with it on an all-in-one controller, meaning it has like 2 decks and a mixer kind of combined together in one unit. It's a little cheaper, and it's taking advantage of some of the newest technology. Or you might have a DJ using a system called Serato, or the technical term is digital vinyl system. That is a way for them to use a record-looking object to control what's happening on their laptop, even though it's not necessarily a real record. The record that they're using doesn't have the music written into it by itself, but it's a way for them to control the music by moving the record, and it moves the position of the song on the computer. So that's kind of like how DJing has evolved over all those years. As far as technology and whatnot. Yeah, one other thing I want to talk about is the experience has changed for the club goer or the dancer, right? Originally, you have these really like dance floor centric experiences. A bunch of people, they're burnt out from work. They just want to let off steam. They meet up with some friends and they go and they dance, right? They have a great time. It doesn't matter who the DJ is. The DJ is in a booth in the corner of the venue. You don't need to see the DJ. A lot of people just want to go and have a good time with their friends, right? That's the way the culture kind of started. Then I would say about maybe like mid 2000s or so, the money started getting inserted into the whole situation or the art form. So now you have mainstream promoters and businesses saying like, hey, you know what? We can take the concert experience, the concert formula, apply it to electronic music, which is now at the forefront and what I guess the kids are into, and sell a lot of tickets. And the more tickets we sell means we make more money, right? And we can throw these big shows that support thousands of people in them, right? And make a ton of money. That's why you get huge names like Calvin Harris or whatever making, $700,000 a night in Vegas for playing his residency. Imagine being able to buy a house every week because you make that kind of money, right? Just for DJing for a couple hours. It's insanity. Versus like your neighborhood DJ who's holding down a residency at their local bar, is lucky if he gets $100 that night kind of thing. So notice that from the perspective of the dancer, it being more like a concert experience, you have everyone standing real close together, facing forward, and watching a show, right? But it's not the same show like a concert is. A concert with a band, you have like, a bunch of people on stage playing live instruments, doing all these crazy things. When you have a DJ on stage, they're pretty much always in one place and they're doing their thing and they're mixing, right? But it's like this weird, like not very visual experience. So back in the day when you had a DJ in the booth, they didn't have to worry about being like this cool, flashy character, right? They were focused on creating the vibe and observing what's happening on the dance floor. Now, you have people who have to, really dance up and down, or they have to wear funny helmets, or they have to throw cakes into the audience, or come up with elaborate stage shows and lighting and visuals and production. And all that stuff is cool, that it's an evolution of the thing, but it's just a little different from the original culture of DJing, right? And, it's totally okay to make progress and move things forward. But I think people should definitely not lose track of what makes this art form so good. And the art form is amazing because the community building and the energy that exists on the dance floor. If you make it a stage show, well then, you can watch that stage show on TV or through a live stream or whatever, right? But being on a dance floor amongst other people who are all on the same wavelength at the same time, that is a super cool experience. And that's something that can't be easily replaced in a virtual or a unidirectional kind of environment. I'm going to give you a little in-depth look of records. So I'm going to switch mics. Okay, so here we've got the record, right? And I'm going to show you this record a little bit closer. Let's see, how do we get, there we go. All right. You can kind of see that there's grooves on there, right? And you can see that there's different visible sections, right? So there's this like section, and then there's like a dark line, and then another section and a dark line. Those different sections of the record is you being able to physically see the way this song is shaped, okay? So the darker the sections are the points of the song that are quieter in tone. And the lighter sections are the parts of the song that are heavier or have more going on. So the dark section is where like the drums usually drop out, or it gets like more mellow, and then you'll have like the drop where it gets back into the light section. The dark sections are also known as the breakdown. And so when people say breakdown today, they're usually referring to that calm moment versus like the super high energy moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing this song and on the turntable, and then I'm going to show you the differences between those sections. All right, so I'm going to start it on a loud section. I can never tell. Okay, and then I'm going to switch it to a dark section. Notice that the drums are the key element that's missing, right? So what DJs do is they can see the song and they can plan out their mixes, so they carefully either let through a breakdown or hide a breakdown. They have different ways to kind of control that energy over the course of the party. Records themselves, when they were mass produced, typically you would have an album, right? And an album would have like say 10 songs on it, 5 songs on one side, 5 songs on the other side. The standard that they agreed to have those records play back at would be 33 1/3 RPMs. And RPM stands for revolutions per minute. So that means in 1 minute, it spins around 33 1/3 times. That was what it takes to get a song to play and sound normal. Now, they also used to make smaller records, and I have an example here. So, I don't know if you guys have seen one of these. It's like a little mini record, right? So this little record is a single, and it was commonly called a 45 because these records play at 45 RPMs. When you have a record playing at a faster speed, the same amount of physical space is going to be larger in the same amount of time. Let's say 1 minute of music takes this much time in a 33, right? And then when you take a minute of music on a 45, Now that same amount of time of music takes up this much amount of time. So whenever you allocate more physical space to the same amount of time of music, right, that means the resolution is getting higher. So the quality of a 45, because it's more space in the same amount of time, is a higher quality pressing. Because the record is smaller, and that record is only meant to hold one song on it, they made it spin faster in order to lengthen how much physical space that song takes up, so you're not dealing with like tiny records. You still need something that's, you know, physical and you can handle, right, versus like tiny little things. But what came with that 45 format is that you can fit more of them on a shelf, right? They're lighter, they use less material, so they're cheaper to produce, they're easier to ship, and all these economic reasons of why this format exists. Now, the most important thing about why this format got popular is that, I don't know if you guys are old enough, but if you remember jukeboxes back in the day, jukeboxes used to be filled with hundreds of these, right? And jukeboxes are about playing the hits. Well, if you put full-on albums in a jukebox and you're only playing a small section of the song, that's like a lot of waste, right? So on these, one song per side, always. And the jukebox knew that, can always anticipate that the beginning of that single would always be at the beginning of the record. So when you have a robot arm pulling the record from a catalog, flipping it down onto the player, and setting the needle automatically, it would be able to do that, all like with simple old robotics. And so yeah, the jukebox is one of the primary drivers behind this, but also record companies, you know, trying to make more money. If you're a super fan, you might buy the full album and you might buy a 45 in addition, even though you may already have that song, because on the flip side of the 45, you would get what's called the B-side. And on the B-side, you might get some new track, bonus track that's not on the album, that's like an instrumental, an a cappella, or like a remix, or like some other song that didn't make the album. So now I'm going to demonstrate what it sounds like to play a 33 and a 45. So here on this left deck, I've got a song. So we've got this song over here, and it's playing at a 33 speed. And then funny thing is, I had the same exact song on the right side, but this one's at a 45. Okay, so we've got the same song playing on both sides, but this one's spinning at 45, and you can see a little way to change the speed right here. This is 45, and on this one, I don't know if that's on screen, but this one's set to 33. So even though they're playing two different records at two different speeds, it's still the same song because they were designed to spin at a specific speed. Now let me play the songs at the wrong speed so you can hear exactly what happens or what it sounds like when you play at the wrong one. So this 33, I'm going to switch this to 45. Okay, now it's super crazy, right? Like that sounds like bizarre. It's like super sped up, it's pitched up, the vocals sound like chipmunks, versus the other side. This is a 45 when I switch it to 33. All right, now it sounds like slow motion. Now it sounds like Darth Vader is going to make a guest appearance on this one in a little bit when the vocals come in. There we go, it sounds like it's slow motion. So that's what it sounds like when you play records in the wrong speed, right? But because it's so obvious, it's something that you quickly toggle between the two settings and quickly find your place. Actually, I'm going to show you a really cool example of how that incorrect way of playing records was actually used intentionally. So let me switch a new record.
Know that I can.
Okay, so now we've got this track over here. It's playing at a 33. And then when I switch it to a 45, so it's kind of passable. It's fast. But if you're well versed in electronic music, you might notice that it kind of sounds like drum and bass. And back in the day, you know, people would take these old funk records, switch them to 45, and then it would sound like drum and bass. So that's how that genre kind of took hold, and then people started producing specifically for that genre. Then similarly, if you take house music, like on this side, and now it's playing on 45, you get something that resembles a little bit closer to happy hardcore. You got something that we hear the pitched up vocals, those really fast BPMs. So that's how those two genres kind of inadvertently came about, and then people started liking it and making that kind of music. Now we're gonna spend the rest of the class going over some of the specifics of the turntables. So here I have the turntable, right? And here I have the on and off switch. So you just turn this little guy, you press start and you press stop. It's got those two speeds, 33 and 45. I explained those. On the top here, you have the slip mat, and the slip mat allows you to hold the record still, but the platter still spins at full speed underneath. And then underneath the slip mat, you may or may not have a piece of plastic here. It's called the slip sheet. And that helps just reduce friction in between the record and the slip mat and the platter, which is made out of metal. These guys protect your records. So when you go to cue or scratch, you're not really doing any damage. Right next to it over here, you've got a little light, and this little light pops up. So when I push this, you probably can't see it at that angle, but there's this little light. You can see a little light there, and this lights up the top of the record. So when you put the needle down, you can see in the dark, because DJs need to do their job in the dark, where you're putting the needle and how to read those different breakdowns, those different grooves in that record. Okay. Next, you have this tone arm. This tone arm is made up of 4 major parts. You've got the arm itself, you've got the cartridge, you've got the stylus, commonly called the needle, at the end, and then you have the counterweight. And all 4 of those parts work together to play the music. Now, the cartridge comes in 2 different styles. So this little cartridge here is like the more modern format. These are marketed more towards, I suppose, electronic DJs or modern ones. And then you have this old style over here. This is more of a classic design. You see, it's significantly bigger. So I'm putting the 2 up next to each other so you can kind of see how much space they take up. This one over here is a little heavier than this side. The heavier the needle, the harder it tracks into the groove. So a lot of hip-hop DJs and turntablists, people who specialize in scratching, will prefer this style because 1, they grew up with it. 2, it holds in the groove a little bit better. They're marketed as if they get a cleaner signal and they're more like refined. But really what they do is they put less wear and tear on your gear because they're not pressing as hard into the groove. Really, they do the same thing. You can scratch on both kinds. They're both gonna serve you fine. It's just really about style and life of your gear. Okay, and so because they come in different shapes and sizes, the counterweight on the back right here, the counterweight lets you balance the 2 weights of the cartridge and here in order to create this nice little balance, so you're not pushing too hard into the record and not giving it enough. So you want to set this so it barely pushes down in the record where you don't lose your beat. So for example, when I've got this song, when I go to scratch it, it doesn't lose track. Now if I have less weight on it, it'll play. Oh, did you hear that? I'm losing the beat. That's because I don't have enough weight on it. So when I add some weight, I can kind of stay in that groove. So yeah, you want to basically set it to be the least amount of weight possible where it doesn't impact your playing. Next, we've got this pitch fader over here, and the pitch fader allows us to change the speed of the two records. So not every song is written at the same speeds, and in order for you to mix in a new song, you want to get it to match the speed of the other track so they can kind of play together simultaneously for a moment, and then when you're done with the old song, you can take that one out, and it's imperceptible unless you're really paying attention or you're a DJ. Then you can hear them all the time. So we have this pitch fader, and when it's here at the center and this little light is lit up, that means it's at 0, means it's at no modification. We haven't changed the speed at all. So the song, as it was written, will sound normal. Okay. Then when I go to change the speed of the song, let's say I want to go slower, then I push it in the up direction. Okay, you hear the song, it got a little slower. And then when I move it fast, now you can hear it speed up when I push the pitch down. So this is a way DJs manipulate the speed in real time in order to get them to match up. Now if you can see, you might not be able to see, but there's little numbers here. And the numbers tell you how much % of a change you're applying to the track. So when you're at the 2+2, that means it's spinning 2% faster. Let's say the song is 100 BPM. If you're spinning 2% faster, then that means it's now spinning at 102 BPM, right? That math is easy when your song is 100 BPM. Now most songs are not 100 BPM. A lot of songs are 120, 140, 180, 90, So doing that math, it's a little harder. What's 2% faster of 120? Well, you would say, oh, 122. Well, not exactly, right? It's actually probably like 123. It's percentage. What I'm getting at is that DJs are not doing math in their head when they're trying to match things up. What they're doing is they're beat matching by ear in order to figure out how fast or slow to make this one to match the other side. And that takes a lot of practice. In the next lesson, I'm going to teach you guys some simple techniques of how to do that, but it's something that just takes a lot of time working at in order to get it right. You have to really train your brain to think of music that way. Okay, so a common question that I get a lot is there's a little dial right here, and they ask, what does that do? It says anti-skating on it. So what the anti-skating does, it allows you to set enough force on the needle to keep it from introducing more wear and tear and not tracking well on the record. So what I've got on this side, I've got actually a blank record. This record has a smooth surface. Means no song is printed on it. You can see it's pretty smooth, right? And what happens is when this record is played, you see the needle immediately gravitate towards the center, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce some skating in order to kind of keep it from moving. Do you see how it's moving a lot slower now? Now it's staying stationary. So now what I've done is I've added a force that's pulling on the needle this way when the force naturally wants to pull in that way. So that's called anti-skating. And the reason why you want to do that is, one, to make sure that the song plays really nicely. It puts less wear and tear on the record and the needle. And so if you magnify the groove, the needle fits right into that groove, right? If you have some skating issues, then maybe the needle will be more on the edge of the groove instead of right there in the center, making good contact with both stereo signals. And so that ends part 1 of the lesson. But since I'm part 2, we're just going to roll right into part 2. I would just want to kind of remind you guys, I want to thank Dance Music Initiative and Make Music Day, Make Music Alliance for hosting us today, and as well as Dilated Recordings for making this all possible, and for Michael back there manning the camera work. Moving on in the lesson, which this lesson is going to focus more on hands-on techniques. I've been doing a lot of talking. I'm going to aim to do more demonstrating of how DJing works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap out the record and then start explaining some of what the mixer does. So I put it on some new records, but first we're going to cover what's going on in the mixer, just so you have a full understanding of turntables and mixer. Oh, and another thing that I want to mention about this class or this session is I'm demonstrating how to DJ using turntables because I think it's the best way to learn. I'm a fan of digital. I actually play a majority of my gigs on CDJs and other digital formats. But when learning how to DJ for the first time, it's always really good to train yourself on this equipment because this equipment forces you to really use your ears to DJ versus using your eyes. And what I mean by that is a lot of the modern tools and software out there does a lot of things for you, right? And that's great. You know, it makes it easier, saves you so much time, lets you focus on other things like doing effects or you know, pulling off great dance moves on stage and stuff. But if those tools ever fail on you, or you get in a situation where you know, you're on different gear because or than what you're used to, or that feature is broken or whatever, you're still expected as the DJ to do a good job. And if you aren't familiar with how to DJ by ear, then you're just gonna, you know, you're not gonna be able to put on as strong of a performance. Another thing that learning by ear really helps is ear training, and you can identify when things are even the tiniest bit off. Versus I've seen so many DJs who've bypassed a step or don't have as strong a training. I'll start hearing the beats pull apart from each other, and they're continuing going like nothing's happening, and I can hear that it's off, but they can't. And then eventually the audience can hear that it's off. And if they don't have the tools to quickly get those tracks back together, well, then their performance suffers. So this is definitely the harder route of going, and it's not practical for everyone to have a pair of turntables in addition to all their other DJ stuff. But if you do get a chance to work with turntables and records, it's really going to just make you a stronger DJ. Another thing about some of the modern ways of performing, like controllers, they're great. CDJs are great. Digital waveforms lets you see the entire song instead of like seeing these grooves, right? All those visual aids are super helpful. But specifically when DJing with laptops, a couple problems that you run into when doing that is when you have a laptop on stage with you, sometimes it's a visual distraction. Sometimes it can get in the way of your performance, like it's a physical barrier between you and the audience. It's taking your attention away. A lot of people joke that when you're watching someone DJ with a laptop, it looks like they're checking their email, or sometimes you get Serato stare, and Serato stare is when you're just like kind of DJing, you're like this, right? Because you're too busy focusing on the laptop. Another thing is with the danger with DJing with a laptop is that it gets your visual attention away from the audience, right? So the audience may or may not be having a great time, and you're missing all of that because you're too busy looking at the interface, right? And so the more you can engage with the crowd in front of you, and you know, be in tune with what's really happening and hearing all the fine points of the music, the stronger you're going to be. One other huge problem with DJing with laptops is laptops are, you know, complicated programs running on complicated operating systems, running on complicated pieces of hardware, right? There's all these potential points of failure. If your software crashes on you, then your whole DJ set is put on hold, right? People like stop dancing and they look at you and you're like saying, hold on, I gotta restart my laptop. Well, that's not a good time, right? So the more you can get away from software and closer to using hardware solutions, whether it be CDJs or controllers or even vinyl, the less points of failure you're gonna have in your DJ sets. So highly recommend you go that route if possible. That's the route that all the professionals use. They're typically on CDJs. Not very many of them are running laptops. Some of your like live performance artists use laptops for their set because it's kind of required for what they want to do. Sometimes they're using Ableton Live to do it. And so they're just putting a lot of risk and, you know, problems. And I've seen it fail in huge shows and concerts and clubs where like their laptop goes down and everyone stops and it's super awkward for a good minute. So with that little precursor, we're gonna go into the mixer. All right. So the main things to keep in mind are you've got your input devices, your media, being plugged into the back here, the back of the mixer, and you want to make sure that the signal is in the right jacks and that you've selected the right signal using this toggle switch up here. So this toggle switch typically, for the most part, lets you switch between CDJs and phono, and phono is a fancy word for a record player, like a phonograph. So today, I've got my two decks plugged into channels 1 and 4, and I've got both of these dials set to phono because I'm spinning actual records. And the reason why there's a differentiation is because a phono signal is analog and a CDJ signal is going to be digital. A digital signal, or what's called line in, is always going to be stronger than an analog signal. So what the mixer does is it says, okay, I'm anticipating a weak signal coming in from these records. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to amp it up. I'm going to amplify the signal so it can potentially meet the same volume level as, let's say I had a CDJ over here. Now, once I've got them plugged in, I can go ahead and start playing a track. So I've got this one playing. And you can probably see the little lights going on. I don't have it going out my system yet because I haven't turned this one up. So we can see the level of music coming in through here, right? And we can control that level of music by moving this trim knob. Sometimes it's called the gain, depending on which kind of gear you're on, but it's either trim or gain. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that this signal is coming in at a good level, at an appropriate level. And so right now, if you can see, it's kind of dark, but you can kind of see that the lights are hitting the +4 range. So that means this record is actually playing a little too hot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this trim knob down a little bit. There we go. So now I'm consistently lighting up the 0 and maybe touching the 1 every now and then. And so basically I'm just trying to get it to where I'm maxing out at the 0 range, which is called unity, and not really hit at the positive range, which is what is called is introducing distortion into your signal. And this whole process is called sound checking. So what I've done is I've sound checked the input of the sound of this record coming into our system. Notice that you can't hear anything playing out yet because I haven't pushed it out yet. So I got to do that to both sides. So I'll start this one. Okay, same thing. This one's running a tad too hot, so I'm taking it down a little bit. So my meter is hitting 0 most of the time, and every now and then touches the +1. So I'm at unity. And now both sides are sound checked. So next thing, we have these 3 knobs. We're working top down. We've got these 3 knobs. This is called our EQ, or the real name is called the equalizer. And so we've got the 3 different ways to affect the frequency of our sound. So when I play this out and everything is at 12 o'clock, the song will sound normal at its regular pace. Okay? So when I move this low knob right here, what I'm going to do is you're going to hear that the bass gets taken out because the low knob controls the bass. You hear that? There's like no drums right now, right? Now when I bring them back in, now they're back. So this is a way that DJs manipulate their songs live for people. So what I can do is I can do the same thing with the highs. Hear that? Those hi-hats, those metallic drums are taken out. All right, now let's try the mids. Now the mids are a little harder to describe because they're somewhere in the middle of the lows and highs, but what the mids typically control are the mid-range sounds such as vocals and snare drums and pianos and guitars and everything in between. So you can change that one. So the highs are typically your hi-hats and your high-pitch melodies, and your lows are typically your kick drums and your bass lines. All right. So that's quickly about the EQ. The EQ, DJs use that to actually mix tracks, which we'll get into in a little bit. After we get here, then I'm going to skip this knob because this mixer is actually way more complicated than you need for your basic setup. So I'm going to skip down here to this light here. It's called the cue. And the cue lets you toggle which channels you want to send into the headphones. Okay, so it's called the headphones cue. So when I have this light up, that means I'm listening to this track in the headphones, okay? And then on this side, this one's off. So now I'm not listening to this one in the headphones. So if I want to isolate this track, then I only have this light on. Now, when DJs are in the headphones, they're going to be monitoring the next song that's coming up through the headphones. So let me show you that. A common way DJs wear headphones is that they'll have one ear on and one ear off, right? So it might be like, yeah, you guys can see that. Okay, so right now what I'm doing is I'm listening to the next song on this side, the one that's covered. And on the exposed ear, I'm listening to what's coming out of my monitor. And a monitor is just a speaker that is playing the same exact thing that the crowd is hearing, but it's facing you, so you don't get any delay with the sound waves going out to the crowd, bouncing off a bunch of walls, getting absorbed, and coming back to you delayed. Because if you were mixing with that, then all your mixes would be delayed, and then you would sound good, but everyone in the crowd would think, oh my God, you're terrible. It sounds awful. So this whole one ear on, one ear off thing really helps. And you can configure which deck you want to play in the headphones by toggling on the lights. So moving past the cue, you've got these line faders right here. So the line faders allow you to control what's going out to the crowd. So when I push this up, now the audience can hear it. And when I take it down, it goes away. So I can confidently go to 10. I can push it all the way up without worrying about it because I've already set the maximum level of sound to be appropriate, right at 0, right? So when I'm here at 10 on here, that means I'm all the way at the top here at 0. If I'm halfway on here, that means even though the lights are coming up, that means I'm actually more down at the halfway mark when it's coming in. Now, I know a lot of DJs out there, professional ones even, say like, oh, why would you stop at 0, right? Like, why don't you go all the way up into the amber? Let me show you. So sometimes DJs play all the way up here, and then it's not until it hits the red, and there's only one red light on this mixer, as to, oh, that's where it's bad, right? Yeah, I mean, they're right, you know, like that's the case, and then Pioneer mixers are configured in a way where they kind of lie to you. Like this 0 is actually a little bit less than 0 sometimes, depending on the gear you're on, so you should pump it up, you know. But I actually think that that's not a great way of doing it, and instead, if you play down here at 0, let me move it to 0. There we go. So if you can see, it's back down at 0. Let's say I introduce an effect. Okay, now that I've introduced an effect, you can see that the effect is actually pumping the signal a little bit louder than what I was originally, right? So if I already was at the brim and then I used an effect and I pushed it past that, well, now I'm distorting. Now I'm playing distorted sounds, which is a lower quality, a distortion of the original. And distortion's bad because, one, the frequencies are not playing normally. You're stressing out the speakers that you're playing on. You can blow speakers that way if you distort too much. So it's a good practice to make sure you're playing, you know, definitely in the green as much as possible, but definitely not in the red. So moving on, next we have this crossfader here. And the crossfader lets us toggle between the left and the right deck. So what I'm going to do is I'm playing both tracks. When they're both playing at the same time, it sounds awful because they're not in sync. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the crossfader to mix back and forth. So when it's here on the left side, that's only playing this one song. And then when I go to the other side, now I'm playing this song. And when it's in the center, both are now playing out. But the problem when both are playing out, when they're not matched, it sounds awful. So that's what the crossfader does, technically. And this is a great tool to use if you're learning how to scratch or you're doing quick cuts and stuff like that. There's a lot of fancy things you can do with a crossfader. But if you're just learning how to DJ, I strongly recommend you either disengage the crossfader or you leave it in the middle always. And you always want to have both channels playing out. So what you can do instead is you can do the same thing on the crossfader by moving these line faders individually. So going left to right here is the same exact thing as going here to here. Same thing. So why might you suppose that mixing this way is going to be superior to mixing this way? Well, one of the key differences is that you have this much physical space plus this much physical space, right, to manipulate the sound, versus this is only this much, right? So I've got roughly like twice as much control using the line faders than I do the crossfader, right? So you can get more fine-tuned with your mix. You can be more specific, more gradual. You have more control as a DJ. So highly recommend you mix using the line faders instead of the crossfader when you're starting out. Once you've got the signal coming down both channels this way, then we go out through our master channel. Okay, there's this one. I'm going to skip a couple of these things, go to the booth monitor knob. The booth monitor knob controls the sound of the volume of your monitor speakers. So remember, those are the speakers facing you. So the DJ has individual control over how loud they want it at them personally, versus the master, which controls the total sound going out to the crowd, right? This is like the main control. So all of our sound gets routed to this channel, and we have this separate meter here gauging how strong the sound is. And let's take a look at it. Right, so now I'm going to bring the sounds up. So if you noticed, I had to turn it down a little bit because I was pushing too much sound out and I was going way past 0 into the 2s and the 4s. So that means I was distorting. And the master is pretty important to keep it down at 0 as much as possible, because anything above 0 in the master is definitely going to be a distortion. Here, it's a little bit grayer. I still recommend you keep it at 0. You definitely want to avoid distortion. You don't want to blow out your gear. So once we've got the signal going out the master, controlled by our master volume, then it gets plugged into your speakers and it goes out to the crowd. So that's what everyone hears. So just to kind of review sound checking real quick, the order in which you sound check, you start with the trim, the line faders, the master level. Here is number 3, and the 4th place is something external to you. Sometimes you might have an engineer operating the sound. Sometimes you'll have knobs on speakers that you can further tweak the sound. You always want to do it in this order. And then lastly, the speakers. That's the best way to preserve your gear. All right, now getting more into like some fundamentals of DJing. Probably one of the most important rules of DJing is understanding what phrasing is. And so phrasing is keeping track of what count you're on or what bar you're on in the music. So most modern contemporary dance music follows the rule of every 8 bars, there's going to be a change in the song, right? And a bar is like a 4 count. So a bar goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So every 8 of those, there's going to be a change in the music. Now, I'm going to let this song play, and I'm going to count out the bars, and you're going to hear that when I cover 8 bars or 32 beats, you're going to hear a change in the song, and it's very, very predictable. And it's those rules that helps keep music danceable, because it remains predictable and kind of follows the rules. So if you follow the rules that the music is going to follow, then everything is going to work out great in your DJ set. So if there's one thing you take away from this lesson, it's that. Always mix on phrase. It just makes better sounding mixes. So the way I'm going to count bars is I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then when it comes to the second 8 count, I'm going to go 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, boom. And right on that 1, right on that boom is the change, so you're going to hear it, okay? So we're going to play this song, and we're going to count together, and we're going to notice that the beat changes right on schedule. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Did you hear that change? There was a little cymbal splash, and now we have this new snare, right? It's always at these changes when you get new things introduced or components taken away, right? So the idea is that when you're mixing in new tracks into the other track, if you time your tracks together so they change together, or you introduce a new track at a change, then that change will sound natural because it's happening on schedule. Okay, so now I'm going to show you an example of what it sounds like when it's random, when you don't follow those rules. So normally on phrase would be in 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is off phrase. Okay, let's listen for the. Did you hear that? That one changed before this one was ready. This one's going to be ready, and now. And that one was like kind of like out of the blue, right? Now I'm going to play it right for you guys. 5, 6, 7, 8.
Do you remember summer 1995?
Okay, now listen to what happens.
We were all a little younger.
They're going to change together. 6, 7, 8.
We were young.
We got that new snare right when he was done.
In our hands. But it ended with the summer. And I still don't understand.
6, 7, 8. There we go. So that's kind of an example of why phrasing is so important. So the next thing I'm going to teach is how to properly cue and drop records, right? So it's taking the timing, but also adding a little physical technique to it too. So first, what you want to do is you want to hold up the needle. And what we're going to do is you're going to make sure your fist is on the table, okay? So your fist is anchored, and only your finger is cradling the needle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide my fist across the table, and I'm going to set it down gently. Notice that I don't have to press down on the needle. I don't have to use my thumb. I just let gravity take it down gently. That just puts very little stress on the equipment. It's real sensitive. You can scratch records if you do it improperly. So now, once I've got the track playing, which you can hear it there, I'm going to take my left hand and I'm going to cue back the record to the first beat. And so what I want to do is I want to take my left middle finger and stop it right outside the label. I'm going to rewind the track. Get back to the beginning. Oh, hear it? It's no more sound. I want to find that first beat, so it's right there. So once I found that first beat, I want to stop right on it. And I'm going to take my right hand. I'm going to gently stop the record from playing. So it's right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine a line connecting the corner of the turntable to the spindle. So I'm going to show you on this turntable because that one's cut off. So you want to connect the corner to the spindle. You want to imagine a line right there, right? That's where you want to have your left hand be placed. So I'm going to demonstrate those in parts so you can see it. So gently set the needle down, advance the record, or rewind the record to the beginning. Find the beat. Stop it with your right hand. And put your middle and ring finger right there on the line where the beat plays. So you want the beat to play there. And what you're going to do is, in order to cue, you're going to go from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, and the beat is going to happen right on that line. So it's going to be like, okay? So you want that beat to play right on that line. So when it comes time to drop it, you're going to count it off. You're going to go 5, 6, 7, 8, and then let go. Okay? So I'm going to demonstrate all that for you away from the mic just so you can see it more naturally. So what I did there was I waited for the phrase to end on this track in order to drop this one in on time. And the whole time I was matching the beat of this song over here by manually pushing this record forward. And now you can hear they're playing together. And they're going to change together. Cool. Okay, so now you kind of get the idea of how to cue and drop, which is dropping one record into the other one. So then what I'm going to teach you next is how to nudge the record forward and backwards in case your drop wasn't perfect, right? Sometimes you might be a little off, and that's okay. You don't have to redrop it. You can nudge the record forward, or you can nudge the record backwards. And the way you do that is you kind of like touch the record while it's spinning, right? And so I'm going to teach you two techniques to do that. One of them is pinching and twisting the spindle. Doing this forward, like this, clockwise, will advance the record slightly forward. So if you were dropped it too late, you can correct it by going forward. Now, if you were too far ahead and you want to bring it back, you just take your middle finger and you lightly brush it up against the platter right there. You just lightly drag. You don't want to hear any pitch bends when you do it. And so I'll demonstrate like how to do it at the right level. So if I wanted to slow it down, I just lightly put my finger here. Notice you didn't hear any weird changes in the music. You didn't see it slow down. Now let me do it too hard. You can see the label stopped spinning. That's way too hard. The amount you do, you just lightly brush up against. And only usually the DJ notices the difference because their ears are trained a little bit better. Similarly, when you need to speed it up, you just give it little turns. Notice you can't really hear too much, but if I were to really exaggerate it, you can kind of hear tweaks in the pitch as I'm doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this record into the other record, and I'm going to show you how nudging works with two tracks. You already can hear that they're not perfect. It's very subtle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try nudging it forward to try to fix it. Can you guys tell if that got any better? It did get better. Now I'm going to get it even more better. Okay, now it's super clean. Now they're playing at the same time. Okay, so what I did was I shifted the beat, right? I shifted the beat from here to here, so now they're lined up. So now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to go too far ahead on purpose, and then I'm going to bring it back. Okay, now it's super obvious that they're offbeat from each other. This one just entered a breakdown, so we're gonna wait for the song to get back to the beat, so it'll be more obvious. One more phrase. Okay. Can you hear they're off? I'm gonna nudge it backwards to make them line up. So that's a lot better. I'm gonna double check with my headphones. Yeah, sounds pretty good. So that's a quick demonstration of nudging. So when you cue and drop a record on beat into the other track, you correct any imperfections using nudging, then you can get things lined up. I'm going to show you a different record so that you have to manage with songs that don't start with the first beat being the obvious beat. Okay, so this record has a little trick to it. This record will have an intro that is not a kick. Okay, so the song started, but we don't hear any beats. So trying to beat match or drop this one into that one at this point, it's gonna be a lot harder because there's no beats to line up to hear whether or not they're playing at the same time or whether or not they're playing like off. And if you physically look at the record, you can see that the beat doesn't drop until actually pretty far in, maybe 4 phrases in or something. So what you do is you just fast forward the track to the part where you would have a beat and drop from there instead. So I'm going to demonstrate that. Okay. This one's got quite a ways to go, so I'm going to just lift up the needle and drop it visually where I see the dark section change into a light section on the grooves on the record. Did you hear that big drop right there? That's the one on this record. So just keep that in mind when learning. Pick 2 tracks that either have a first beat in the beginning and then learn how to work with these tracks later on. You can kind of see, let me see in the light, you can see there's an outside edge here that's kind of a different color than the inside right here. That outside edge is that breakdown or that soft spot without a beat. So those just make it more challenging to DJ, but as you gain more experience, you'll be able to handle those no problem. Okay, let's switch back to the other one. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to demonstrate a mix. And I'm going to use a method that I like to call it power mixing. So if you've ever learned how to play guitar, there's a concept called a power chord, right? And a power chord is kind of like an easier way of holding the neck of the guitar in order to play the same chord that you're supposed to play by really specifically holding the right chords. So this way of mixing is a way for you to generally get a certain sound out of your mix that is kind of like dead easy but sounds amazing every time. So I highly recommend when you're starting out, you start off with these mixes, this technique. It's going to make your mixes sound great from the get-go, and it's super easy to follow. And it all relies on phrasing and the rule of 32 that I taught you just a few moments ago. Okay, So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cue up this record and drop this into that one, nudge it if I need to, and then I'm going to explain the power mix. And I'm playing all this stuff out loud because I want to demonstrate it for you guys. Normally, I wouldn't be queuing both records up out loud. Okay, so I dropped it on beat. Sounds reasonable. They sound relatively together. Didn't have to nudge. All right, so now I'm going to set up my mix. And the way you set up your mix is you want to make sure your incoming track is all the way down. So now we're only hearing this side. And what I'm going to do is every phrase, I'm going to make a change, because on phrases is when changes feel natural. I'm going to do them at the right time in order for the new song to come in naturally. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the EQs of this track to 50% on all three knobs. So I'm going to turn down the bass to half, turn down the mids to half, and turn down the highs to half. Okay. Then on phrase, I'm going to bring this in one motion. 5, 6, 7, 8. Cool. So now we're in the mix. We've got both tracks playing, and the audience barely even hears the new track coming in. Now I'm going to switch the highs. There we go. So right on the phrase, I swapped the highs. I made this high at 12 o'clock or 100%, and I turned this high from 100% or 12 o'clock down to about 50. There we go. So then on the next phrase, I did the same thing for the mids. And you can hear the two tracks. They're starting to mix. Okay. So I had to nudge one of the tracks because I heard them getting a little off beat, but I brought them back and I missed a phrase. So I'm just going to get the next phrase. It's coming up. They're just fitting super nicely together.
We were all a little younger, a little more.
You hear the mix?
We were young.
Okay. At the next phrase, I'm going to take out the old track. Notice I've got this one playing at 50%. I've got this one playing at 100%. So I swap the energy. And I'm going to remove the old track.
Don't understand. Tell me why.
And there we go. That was a simple transition. So I totally mixed from this record to this record gradually over time in a way that was kind of brain dead easy by following the rules of music, just making sure that everything is on 32. I call this process power mixing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to power mix the other way. I'm going to bring this one in to this one. And again, I'm going to start out by mixing this one out loud just so you can hear all the parts of what I'm doing. But then I'm going to tell you when the actual mix starts. Double checking the beats. They sound good. They sound together. Okay, I'm ready to begin my mix. I took this one out, and I turned these all down to half, 50%, 9 o'clock. And then I'm going to bring this in on phrase.
Really let me know you were mine, oh mine, but you fell out my world. I really miss you.
Now we're in the mix, but we're bringing this one in subtly. Then we're going to swap the highs again.
Nothing left to say. Tell me why.
If you hear carefully, you can hear the highs bleeding into this track from this song.
Why does summer have to go away?
And the mids.
Was it a stay? Tell me why.
So now we have the highs and mids from this track being filled in with the lows of this track. Also, we're in a breakdown, so this is a great moment to let this ride and skip a phrase so we don't bring in no bass by bringing this up. We're going to wait for the bass to return on the track. It's coming up. And right at that drop, clean transition. But notice that we still have this track in there, right? So it's still a mix. At the next phrase, we're going to take this one out. There we go. That's a mix. That's a power mix. So that's a very simple standard way of mixing. Like I said, it sounds good in like 90% of the time. You can switch the order. You can go from top down. You can go bottom, top, middle. You can switch that up. You want to pick the right frequencies for the right songs based on where they're at, and use your headphones to keep track of what's the right decision. And when you do it, when you practice, just listen to the resulting mixes, and you can really tell what works and what doesn't work. A good tip is to record your mixes and play them back when you're in your car or whatever. And that's really going to help you grow as a DJ to like really look back and listen back at what you've been doing. Okay, so the final thing is going to be teaching you a few beat matching techniques. So beat matching is this like super kind of difficult, complicated thing. It took me about a year to be able to do it quickly. It was super hard because your brain isn't accustomed to listening to two different forms of music at the same time. And so what you have to do is you have to hear two different things and you have to reconcile them to make them both line up. And that just takes practice. But I'm going to teach you some very formulaic ways to do it in order to save some time and to develop good practices. And then I'm going to show you a couple more techniques on top of that that make it even faster. So we're going to start by playing this one again. And I changed the BPM on that track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to figure out how fast this one needs to go to line up with that one. Right now we're at 0, but we know that 0 is not right. 0 is a good place to start, but you don't have to. So you still want to cue and drop it just like before. You hear them? They're going at different speeds. So they sound terrible, and they're drifting further and further apart. They were on for a moment, but now they're off again. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop it again, now that we know they're off, and we're going to try to figure out, does this record need to go faster or slower? And the way I do that is I introduce a nudge. Either I'll start nudging it faster or I'll start nudging it slower, and all I'm listening for is which one is going to make it sound better. Okay. Did speeding it up make it better? I don't think so. Let me slow it down. Okay, it's very difficult to tell what's going on, but I know that when I was nudging it slower, it was actually getting better than getting further off. So now I know that the answer to match that side, oh, sorry. No, I gotta make this one faster. So when I move this pitch, I know it's gonna be somewhere between 0 and 8, okay? So now let me just, I'll go to 4. I just go some extreme that I'm pretty confident is too fast, and I'm going to do it again. And let's see if 4 is too fast. Okay, I can hear them drifting. And now when I nudge it slower, so right there I was nudging it slower, and I was able to keep them together by slowing this record down. So that means that this 4 position is too fast. So now I know my boundaries are somewhere in between 4 and 0. So there's no point in testing anything above 4 or anything below 0 because I know the answer is somewhere between there. And the best way to get there the fastest is to split the distance. So what's in between 0 and 4? 2. So I'm going to move the pitch fader to 2. And now I'm going to figure out which side of 2 it's on. Same technique. Redrop it. Okay, I hear that they're off. I tried slowing it down. It made it worse, so I'm going to speed it up. Okay, they're close together now. I hit a breakdown on that side. So whenever you hit breakdowns and you lose the beat, you're not going to be able to find the beat together. So you either wait for it to pass or you reset the needle. We're almost out of it, so we're just going to wait for it to pass.
I just say, man. I just say.
Okay, that last nudge told me that I need to speed this record up in order for them to line up. So I'm gonna. So now we know the answer is somewhere in between 2 and 4 because when I made it faster it's better. So now I'm gonna move it to 3. Notice I didn't reset the needle at this point. Okay. I slowed it down a tad and it made it better. So now I know that 3 is too fast. So I'm going to move it somewhere between 2 and 3. I'm going to split the difference, 2.5. Okay, they're together again. Okay, so we just about got there. So you keep doing that process of first setting boundaries and using a divide and conquer technique, or if you guys are familiar with more technical stuff, it's kind of like doing a binary search. I'm not going to explain it. We're running out of time. You can Google what that means. But yeah, that's just one way of beat matching, right? And then I switched over to nudge and adjust, nudge and adjust. And that's how I get it from most of the way there to all the way there, is I apply an experiment by nudging it in a direction, hearing whether or not it made it better or made it worse, and then moving the pitch fader accordingly. If it made it better, I move the pitch fader in the direction that I nudged. If I made it worse, then I move the pitch fader in the opposite direction that I nudged. So that's kind of some really quick techniques of how to beat match. Once you get really good at it, then you can do most of your beat matching just with the pitch fader and not have to touch the platter very much at all. But that takes a lot of practice. Highly recommend you start with the other two techniques first, and then you'll start getting more and more comfortable with just like finding it really quickly. I would like to thank Dance Music Initiative and Make Music Day for hosting these sessions, as well as Dilated Recordings for putting on the stream. Yeah, I think that's it. Oh, we have a question. Okay, cool. It says, do you have a Twitch or something you stream on? We are working those details out. Right now, all of our streams have been here on YouTube. So if you subscribe to our YouTube, then you'll get notifications as to when we go live. So that's the best way. We might do Twitch in the future. We might explore other platforms like Mixcloud. Those are awesome. But for now, it's YouTube. If you want to find out more about me as a DJ, I have all my mixes on Mixcloud. So if you go to Mixcloud and you search BChang or Brian Chang, Brian with a Y, you'll find my profile and you can hear some of the mixes that I put out. I want to share something about Dance Music Initiative. Dance Music Initiative is a nonprofit. What we do is we do a lot of like community-oriented free lessons about DJing and DJing-related topics. When it's not a pandemic environment, we host these live and in person. We're based out of Orange County, California, and we're looking to start chapters all across the nation and world. But for now, we do it all out of Orange County. And if you're interested in collaborating or putting on Dance Music Initiative related events in your neighborhood, please reach out. You can contact us via this, comment on the YouTube channel or whatever, or reach out to us on Facebook. And just get involved. We're super welcoming, and we just want to share the culture and the art form with as many people as possible, because music is a great thing, and everyone should be involved with it as much as they can in their lives, because it really brings people together.